Welcome everybody to NumismaTalks. Every second and fourth Thursday of the month at noon Mountain Time, we will be here with a new presentation. During this presentation, you may come up with questions or comments. If you can put that in the Q&A button at the top or bottom of your page, depending on how you have that set up, we will address those questions at the very end after the presentation. Now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, David Hendin. David is Vice President and Honorary Curator of the American Numismatic Society. He's author of The Guide to Biblical Coins, 6th edition, and 16 other books, as well as hundreds of numismatic articles and papers in journals. Hendin's recent awards include the 2022 Burnett Anderson Award of the ANS, ANA, and Numismatic Literary Guild, the 2022 Trustee Award of the American Numismatic Society, the 2013 Gunnar Holst Numismatic Foundation Medal of the Swedish Numismatic Society, University of Gothenburg. David is presenting coins of the Hasmonean kings. And David, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thank you, Paula. Hello, everybody. You need to know that I cannot see you. I'm going to do my best to look at my camera here, but you're not going to be looking at me, luckily, and so I'm going to share my screen with my PowerPoint, I hope. Let's see. Yes, there it is. That's what we want to share. And good. Now we want to do a slideshow from the beginning. Good. So now I hope that everybody can have a good look at the screen. I just want to say to you that I have been I've been doing this for about 55 years, and that's counting conservatively because that only counts from the time that I went to Israel in 1967 as a volunteer of the Six-Day War. Here I am with one of the shop proprietors at the time, and goes on until now, and it's 55 years of meeting people and looking at coins. Here's Yaakov Mesherer and I around 1990 at one of the sites, Shraga Kedar and I in the 80s. This fellow here with the fez is, we called him Abu Anton, but his name was Kando, and he's extremely famous because he is the man who sold the Dead Sea Scrolls that ended up in the Israel Museum. He sold the scrolls to the Metropolitan. And by the way, where did Kando buy the scrolls? He bought the scrolls from some Bedouin boys, including my friend Abu Ali Atawil, who is right here between me and my friend Don Simon, again, back in the days when we were young. And here I am excavating at Sepphoris. I did that for 3 seasons, and I highly recommend it. Not too many numismatists actually have field expertise. Before I start really talking to you about the Hasmonean coins, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the motifs on the Hellenistic coins that were in circulation in around the 2nd century BC in the area of the ancient Holy Land. So there were coins that circulated in this area that had cornucopias, and you can see here examples, cornucopia here, cornucopia here. These are the splayed cornucopias, which certainly show up later in the Judean coinage. Here's another example of splayed cornucopias on an Antiochus VII coin. Cornucopias going in the same direction, one cornucopia. So let's just remember that a cornucopia in the 2nd century BC was a common motif for an ancient coin. Now, there we go. Another common motif for ancient coins at this time were wreaths. Here are Seleucid and Ptolemaic coins, all featuring wreaths around important motifs. So cornucopias and wreaths were used, and the wreath actually was also noticeably used as a symbol of victory. And here it is, and here, just, we're going to get here later, but here is an example of a wreath. Just compare it to this wreath, very similar, used on a Hasmonean coin and a coin of Seleucus I. Anchors, lots of anchors on Seleucid coins especially, and they look like this and like this. And we assume from the inscriptions on these Seleucid anchors that they're mostly meant to be shown inverted. I didn't really understand that until I mentioned it to a friend who was a sailor, and he told me that anchors are always stored on the ships inverted and leaning against the side so they can easily be pushed over. So that may be part of it, just the way they were conceptualized. Now, and lily, now a lily, here's a lily on a Seleucid coin of Antiochus VII. There's also an anchor here that seems to clearly have been intended to be inverted, because the date here is shown correctly. So here's a lily, here's a lily, and this is actually an ancient anchor that was found in the water in Joppa. This coin is apparently the very first coin that was struck at the Hasmonean mint in Jerusalem by Hyrcanus I. We're going to get to the chronology of each of the kings in a second, but this Hyrcanus I was the first Hasmonean ruler. At first they were high priests, who established a mint in Jerusalem, and through some kind of a agreement with the Syrians, this coin was struck in the Jerusalem mint, featuring images that were not offensive to Jews, no graven images, but it did carry the name of the king. Now, those were fairly short-lived, but before we get back to that, let me talk to you a little bit about another motif, and that is the lily. And somehow a lot of people saw this coin of Hera on this coin of Olympia on a promotional ad for this lecture, and wondered how this was a Hasmonean coin. It's not, but it does illustrate the use of lilies on ancient coins, and here they are on Yehud coins and on some of the later Hasmonean coins. Also, the capitals of the pillars in the porticos of the temple were decorated in the shape of lilies. And again, lily, lily, and lily that show up on the Judean coins. But they don't, as I'm trying to explain to you, basically, that none of the motifs that we're going to see on any of the Hasmonean coins popped out of the air. They were all being used. I think that some of the numismatists who specialized in Judean coins in the 40s and 50s were a little bit focused on the establishment of a Jewish state, both in modern times and making parallels to ancient times. And I think that they didn't fully recognize the contribution that the Hellenistic coins made to the motifs on Judean coins, even though they were very obviously adopted for use by the Jews. Now, just so you know, the family that we're talking about today, it is the Hasmonean family. A lot of people refer to this as the Maccabean family, after this guy, Judah Maccabee. However, Maccabee was really a name that was given to Judah. It was a nickname that was given to him. It was never a family name. It meant the hammer, and it was in reference to his military skills. But they all descended from Mattathias of Modin, who was said to be from a family called the Hasmoneans. Now, the people in this family, oh, by the way, this is what we think that Judah the Maccabee looked like. This is the best image that we have, because as you know, at this time, Jews did forbid the use of graven images, not only on their coins, but on all of their art. So this image of Judah Maccabee is, I guess, as good as any other. This family tree shows in capital letters the people who we know or who we believe minted ancient coins, who minted coins during this dynasty. The first was Hyrcanus I. Here's an example of one of his coins. Alexander Jannaeus, also called Yanai, Yehonatan, or Yonatan. He issued coins with his name on it. Aristobulus issued coins with his name on it. And then there were these small imitations that were apparently initially issued under Jannaeus and later issued under his successors. And finally, Antigonus Mattathias issued coins. Now I'm going to show you a little bit more about ancient coins. By the end of this talk, you're going to think that you've seen so many ancient coins that you don't know what you're going to do about it. But let me just say that I have seen 10,000 times more coins than you have seen today. Many of them I've seen in my hands. I've done it over 55 years, and it does take that much time and energy to feel like the coins are really talking to you. Now, as I said earlier, these are coins that were supposedly or apparently from the Jerusalem mint of Antiochus VII. First of all, the dates correspond between 132 and 130 correspond to the initial years of John Hyrcanus I's reign as high priest of the Jews. Second, these are all aniconic coins, no images, contrary to most of the Seleucid coins struck in the area. Thirdly, they use a lot of the imagery that is taken from the Seleucid coins, but doesn't seem to have been offensive when used in this way on the Judean coins. That could be read two ways. The lily could be the attribute of a certain god or goddess in the Greek pantheon, but it could also reflect the flora of the land. An anchor could be a Seleucid symbol, or it could represent the fact that, you know, the Jews owned or had some coastal territory and ships. The helmet, in the case of Antiochus, could have referred to some kind of victory or military, and this is the prow or aphlaston of a ship. All of these images will repeat in the Hasmonean coins. First of all, here is a helmet on a Hasmonean coin of Hyrcanus I. This is a very rare coin. It has two cornucopias, and it has the inscription of Jonathan, Jonathan the high priest and the head of the community of the Jews. And if you take a look at this helmet and this helmet, it's very hard to see that they're not related, especially since this is an extremely early, perhaps the earliest Hasmonean coin, and this is one of the only two coins struck under Antiochus VII at the Jerusalem mint. Here, another issue is the flower that's on some of the coins. Is it a rose that was copied after the Rose of Rhodes, which you can see on these coins, on this jar handle? And by the way, the coins of Rhodes did not circulate heavily in Israel. However, these jar handles with the imprint of Rhodes are really quite common, which shows a big trade of the time and a big knowledge of what this symbol was, a rose. So now the question on some of these Hasmonean coins is it a rose or is it a lily? I earlier showed you some coins that seem to me to be very clearly lilies. Well, here are a few coins that seem to me very clearly not to be lilies, which are rather distinctive. but they sure do look like these roses of Rhodes. So I think if you want to be absolutely accurate, you can call them a flower, but I am referring to these as roses. Now, let me get back to the earliest coins of Hyrcanus I. All of his coins had essentially the same inscription. Now, I'm going to read you this inscription because I assume that some of you are not able to read ancient Hebrew script. That's too bad. I can't teach it to you today, but you can learn it. The easiest way to learn it is to first learn the Hebrew alphabet, just memorize the names of the letters and understand what sounds they make, which is very easy, and then transcribe them to the Paleo-Hebrew letters, which match almost exactly. Now, the reason that I put these particular coins on this slide is that they all use the same inscription. Yehochanan, HaKohen, the priest, Hagadol, the high priest, Rosh, head of, Rosh, the Hever, community, Yehudim. So there is this series of coins with the name of Yehochanan, which is Hyrcanus, that are all linked to the title Rosh, which means the head of the community of the Jews. That seems to be a title that's in addition to the high priest title. The reason that we'll get to that in a second. But the other thing that I wanted to point out to you is that on these coins that say Yehochanan, later the word Rosh goes away and they only say Yehochanan, but there is a design element right here between these two cornucopias, which again they're very nice Judaic symbols because they can represent plenty, they can represent the shofar, they can represent all kinds of wonderful Judean things, but they do also represent Hellenistic symbolism. But apparently, once you take these objects away from their Hellenistic context and stand them by themselves and maybe add another element, they become much more quote unquote Jewish. Now, the issue is, what is this? Is this a pomegranate? Whoa, it looks like a pomegranate. But wait a minute, is this a poppy? Wait, it looks like a poppy and a pomegranate. Actually, the difference between a poppy and a pomegranate is very little in the actual profile view, especially at different stages of development. The difference is that this poppy thing is probably the size of a 50-cent piece, and the pomegranate is the size of a very large tomato. But the issue is this a poppy or a pomegranate? Is this a poppy or a pomegranate? Is this? I've actually written an article together with my friend David Jacobson from London, and we argue that it may have been intended to have been a poppy or a pomegranate by the person who conceived the coins, but we don't think that that message got to the people who did the carving of the dies, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about it. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is, again, just underlining that all of these images that you see here could appear in strictly Hellenistic motifs. But in the case of the coins and in the case of these rings and ring stones, all of which have been found in the ancient Holy Land, you can see that these were kind of pilgrims' rings or souvenir rings, cornucopias, lilies, the rose flower, the palm tree, the various species of the Holy Land. So these were very well adopted. The other thing that I want to show you before we get into the heavy-duty coinage is that the way these coins were made. These coins were, the bronze was heated and poured into molds. This one is broken, but you can see how it would have been if it was whole. and it was poured into the ends of these molds, and it filled up the spaces, and the spaces look like this. By the way, this one is in the Israel Museum. This one of my volunteers found it at the excavation of Sepphoris in 1985. It just so happened that the night before I showed in a slide lecture this photograph, and this very nice woman came to me with this broken piece of rock about 2 inches wide and said, you know, this reminds me of that slide you showed us last night, and I'll be darned if we didn't find a mold for Prutot in Sepphoris. Now, when you pour the bronze in and it fills in and then it cools and you remove it, you get a strip that looks like these. It could be, depends on how much space they chiseled in between. And then when they're being struck, the guy would hold these with the tongs and pull them through and strike, strike, strike. Every once in a while, they would strike, double strike, or strike and it would break, and they would strike with a coin in the die and you would get an incuse. And then they would be chopped apart. Sometimes you would get long things, sometimes you would get no things if the planches were like this. But so this is the way they were made. And if you see these little protrusions like a nipple, that's from these holes. Why do these holes exist? You can even see them here. Because this is a very soft chalk stone. And the way they made these molds was by drilling consecutive holes, and sometimes one on top of another, and sometimes connecting the holes with these channels. So it's very interesting how they made coins in Judea at the time. Now let's go to a group of Hyrcanus I coins. I told you that the very earliest ones all carry the word Rosh, and they're rather scarce. These are coins that do not have the word Rosh. The simple inscription is Yehochanan, the high priest, and the community of the Jews. Now, I want you to notice a couple of things about this group of coins. As you can see, these are all the same type. They all have a wreath with what I call a classical Hebrew inscription. This is only my description because this looks like the more classical Hebrew letters. So I refer to them as classic. And I also want you to notice that the alpha on top of each one of these is a very fancy alpha. You know, it's not just a normal A, but it's a very fancy alpha. And I believe that this alpha was a political bow to one of the Seleucid kings at this time. Maybe what happened was the Seleucid king objected to Hyrcanus's use of the word head of the community of the Jews, the word Rosh. And so Hyrcanus took the word Rosh off of the coins and put this little alpha up there to you know, give a nice polite bow to the king. By the way, these are just an occasional drawing. If you have trouble envisioning what a coin might look like without too much wear. And again, these could be poppies, they could be pomegranates. Either one would actually work in the context. A pomegranate may be a little bit more Jewish, but poppies are certainly prevalent and grow wild all throughout the land. So the other thing is that you could say, well, David, there are these other A's on these coins. They don't look the same, and they are. There's an A here. You can't see it down here. There's an A here. There's a very nice big bold A here. There's a monogram here that looks like A pi. And there's a monogram here that could be an A or a delta. And on this coin, you can see where it could be an A or a lambda, but it's probably an A. This looks like an A pi. Now, these are clearly not in the same ballpark as these. These are fancy, glorious alphas that were put into the wreath, and they're very important. They're along here with the, you know, the word portrait of the king. They couldn't use a real portrait of the high priest. They couldn't use a portrait of him, so they made a word portrait. They said, yes, this is Yehochanan, the high priest, and the community of the Jews. That's who's making this coin. I don't have to put my picture here. It's against my religion. But these are different. These are probably minter's marks. Here's a whole slew of them. They appear to be these. Yaakov Mesherer, whoops, sorry. Let me go back to my previous one. Yaakov Mesherer, Yaakov Mesherer showed them as these. They have 3 different locations. They can be on the left or the right or up on the upper left. They're usually very clear, and they invariably appear with very specific kinds of scripts, and then sometimes they don't appear at all. It's actually, we don't really know what to make of them, except that they seem to be sort of scratched into the dies and sort of quasi-official. Here's another group of, classic style, and none of these coins have monograms. Now, some of them have ribbons and other things that come out, but these do not appear to have monograms. So, what does it mean when they do have monograms? If they don't have monograms, we don't know. And that's why I say it's just hard to put much. I can say maybe the coins with monograms are a wee bit earlier, but you don't know. These are what I refer to as wedge style. You can see that the coin dies were cut with chisels that were very straight. Look, these nuns, which are very different on the classic style, are invariably just straight lines, Yehochanan, and they're invariably just straight lines on this type. And as I said, many of these do have monograms, and many of them very clearly just do not have monograms. The interesting thing is that there's another group of Hyrcanus the coins where the letters are crude, the H's look like backward E's most of the time, the legends are incomplete, and I don't really know of any of these coins with clear monograms. I also don't know if these are official issues created by apprentice die cutters in the mint. I kind of doubt that, because if that was the case, we would see many examples of this type of a reverse with a much more standard obverse. And as you can see, these are kind of a little stylized obverses. They sort of go with the art style of the reverses, which suggests to me that they are created in different small mints. And here's another group of Hyrcanus coins that have, they're sort of fluid letters. I mean, it's like sometimes a lefty writes a script in backhand. This is sort of backhand. It's slanting in a funny way. The letters are either spidery or blurry, or sometimes very sharp. And sometimes they have monograms and sometimes they don't. And these are all, again, uniformly Hyrcanus I with the name Yehochanan. Now, it's very interesting that his follower was his brother, Aristobulus. And according to traditional numismatic discussions since the early 1900s, even the late 1800s, this Aristobulus was either Aristobulus I or Aristobulus II. It wasn't quite sure, and that unsurety really continued for quite a long time. Some years ago, I made an observation that I published, which, to the opinion of most people, solved the problem. There are 2 kinds of Aristobulus coins. One of them has the sort of cursive type scripts with the straight up and down letters. There's no 2 ends, okay, because his name is Judah, not Yehochanan, not Jonathan. So, but these are still, you can see that they're still the straight up and down letters. And this is much more of a square type letter. And I'm going to show you why that makes that a difference. Also, take a look at this type of splayed cornucopia. They're sort of short and fat. And this type of splayed cornucopias, which are sort of longer and more stylized. But look at this. This is a coin of Hyrcanus in the style of script that is almost identical to this. And look at these. Look at how similar these are, and in fact could actually be the same die. And here is the other style of Aristobulus coins, and look where this style is almost exactly copied. And in fact, many collectors misread this coin as a coin of Aristobulus, or misread this coin as a coin of Janaeus based on the letter type, but this the letter style. But this coin says Yohon Tan. That X is a big giveaway. It's a T. The only Hasmonean ruler who has that X in his name is Jehonatan, Janaeus. So this is how we proved that the Aristobulus, the Judah coins, belong to Aristobulus I. He only calls himself high priest on his coins. He did reign for less than a year in 104 BC, but according to Josephus, he is the first of the Hasmonean kings, Hasmonean rulers, who was granted the name king instead of high priest, but he never had the opportunity to use it on his coins. And here are many coins of the two styles. The wedge style, quite clear, and now the square style on all of these, quite clear. So here we have a definite link, probably to a die cutter or a group of die cutters in the mint who were working with tools of this style, who eventually gave way to new workers in the mint in another generation who were cutting letters with different chisels in a different style. And so during the last few years of Aristobulus, the last few months of Aristobulus, they were manufacturing them according to their style. So that explains the two styles of Aristobulus coins. And oh, by the way, let me just say that I told you that I did publish this quite some years ago, but very recently an Israeli scholar named Chaim Sham has actually matched some of these dies, which absolutely proves my theory beyond a shadow of a doubt. And these are some of the square letter coins that I showed you of Janaeus. Many people think that these look like the Aristobulus coins, but look, the tough, the X, Yohon Tan, those two letters are TN. Anytime you see that X clearly on the second line, that's your clue that it's a coin of Alexander Janaeus with the name Yonatan. And I put this one in here because I wanted to have it pop up. This is the Aristobulus of the exact same style. Again, I mean, you can even see the letters are extremely similar. They're just in style, they're just different. Here is a hay, and for HaKohen, the high priest, and here is a tan for Yonatan before they could start the word high priest. On Janaeus's coins, they are shown, as I told you here, as Yehonatan, but they also appear in a second form. These are the Yehonatan ones, okay? They all have Yud, Hey, Vav. This has a Nun and a Tuf, Nun and a Tuf. And this is more of the classic style script. The previous one I was showing you was the square type script. This is what I call the cursive style script. Now, if you're speaking English and you're talking about cursive, you're talking about handwriting versus printing. That's not the kind of cursive I mean, but if you look at the style of these letters, it's almost as if they threw out the use of the tiny chisels and they actually created punch marks in the form of the letters, and they've actually punched them one at a time into the coins. We're trying to do some work on figuring out if that's true, but in the meantime, that's why I call them cursive. And again, by the way, let me call your attention to the fact that the cursive style of legends of Janaeus have very, very similar styles of cornucopias. These are, I mean, especially similar with these big fat cornucopias on the top and they get skinny on the bottom. This is a little bit more conventional, but these are the kinds of sort of normal pairings that were occurring in the mint. Now, there is another kind of Janaeus coin, and the name is no longer Jehonatan, but Yonatan. And we know that Yonatan was also used in ancient times as a name for Jehonatan, especially when there was no space to write it or for other abbreviation purposes. Now, the first thing you'll notice about these coins is they're all very strangely crude. I mean, look at I call these wild style inscriptions. The chet is sideways, everything is opened up. They're incomplete, but they're curiously legible. And the interesting thing about them when you read them is instead of saying Jehonatan, they say Yantan. Yan, here it is, Yantan in the wreath with the cornucopias. Look, I'm just noticing that these two look like they may be the same reverse dies. But again, rather crude reverses. This may have been a very late issue of Janaeus. It could also have been an issue that was struck at a separate small mint, because this style of cornucopia is invariably coming with this style of script. Janaeus had another series that almost certainly came from a very small local mint, and these are so crude that they're virtually illegible. Every once in a while, you can make out a letter or two that are totally out of place, but often, I mean, it's strictly scratches. And I can only imagine that there was some outpost city where they needed some small change, and they made some bronzes because they weren't plentiful, and the government sort of closed their eyes to it, and so did the merchants. After all, this is what happened in the post-Civil War or the Civil War time with Civil War tokens. It happened in Canada with Condor tokens. They were issued, they were accepted locally as money, they weren't ever sanctioned or supported by the government. And we believe that's true because in the groups, in excavations and other finds of Hasmonean coins, all of the different types are mixed together. So we're assuming that nobody pulled these out and said, these aren't any good, we're going to not use them. They were right in there with all the used coins. Now, I want to call your attention to something that's often discussed, and that is the Hasmonean priestly versus royal coinage. So Janaeus is almost never called high priest and king on the same coin. The exceptions are the famous overstrikes, which I'm going to show you some, and those really aren't included because they represent two different coins. And then there's a single unusual type, not coin, it's not unique, with it that has a Paleo-Hebrew legend, priest the king. And I'm going to show you that, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it. But I want to stress that Janaeus is named as king on his coins in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. But he's named high priest on his coins only in Paleo-Hebrew script. It's significant. It's probably politically significant. We don't know the exact details because, as my dad used to say, our retrospectoscope is kind of low on battery. Now, the other Janaeus coins that you're all very familiar with, and I saved to the last, are the royal series of his anchor diadem. And we call them the royal series because really it is coming forward along with the early lily coin that I showed you, the lily and the anchor that said King Jonathan in Hebrew and also King Alexander in Greek. This follows up with those rather scarce coins that mostly ended up getting overstruck. We're going to be there in a minute. And you have these many varieties of the anchor and cornucopia coins. These are the full and early coins with full anchors Then you get some of them that are slightly reduced in size. These are a couple of them. And actually, we're going to see it again later, but this is one of the examples of the coin that instead of saying Yehonatan HaMelech, Jonathan the king, this isn't a very good example, but this says King the priest. All these other ones very clearly say Jonathan the king, Jonathan the king, Jonathan the king, Jonathan the king, and King Alexander in Greek. And on these coins that are the priest, the king, my friend and my teacher, Dan Barag, believed that this coin was a political reflection, where there were factions who were debating whether the Hasmoneans should be called high priests or whether they should be high priest of kings. The Pharisee faction opposed the two titles since the Maccabees were not of King David's lineage. This is a very scarce issue. It's invariably got this very skinny anchor, although not always from the same dyes. And it also always has these sort of very strange inscriptions that basically say the priest, the king, and then there's some kind of a monogram or letter that's sort of hard to understand, and we're not sure what it is. I believe that these were struck in a locality by partisans who believed that he should have both titles against the Pharisees. No proof, we don't know, and we can't know it. Another thing, by the way, just take a look right here. See where my arrow is right here? See how that coin was very slightly double struck? You see shadows of the dots and shadows of some of the letters here. Interesting. So that's the priest, the king coin, and the Janaeus Royal series has an amazing number of irregular coins. And to my experience, these coins are always extremely irregular on both sides. It's very unlikely that they were made in the main mint, because if they were made in the main mint by apprentices, as some people have suggested, then crude obverses, from day to day would be combined with well-engraved reverses and vice versa. But in this case, these are, some of these may be the same dies, but these are essentially all different irregular coins, certainly not struck at the central mint, not struck for any political purposes because there's no change or attempt to change the message that they're giving. So we can only assume that there were many, many markets in the ancient Holy Land that were regularly very short of small change. And they were just cranking these out. Look at how crude this one is. This is really an amazing one. And all of them, none of them have, proper inscriptions. None of them are properly engraved. And they're all, badly struck. These are a good batch, but that's very typical of the Judean coins. And that's really why the irregular series was overlooked for such a long time. Now, I mentioned to the overstrikes, and again, I showed you earlier, but this is they call it the Janaeus Lily coin. I prefer to call this the Janaeus Rose coin. And it says Yehonatan HaMelech, right here, the king, Jonathan the king, and here it says Basileus Alexander, King Alexander, and it has the anchor. It could be right side up, it could be upside down. Now, that, as I said, was the very first coin where Janaeus was called king in Greek and also called king in Hebrew. And very clearly, there was a political faction that did not like those coins. And here's the proof. Look, overstruck on one of these coins. There's the rose. There's the anchor. This one is clearly overstruck. You can't see exactly how. This is one that may have not been overstruck just because it's so hard to see. Here's one that was overstruck. There's the anchor. Look, there's the anchor very clearly. All of these overstruck. This is a political message. There's nothing economic going on here. Why were they overstruck? And by the way, I'd like to call your attention to something very interesting. They are all overstruck with coins that have the Yonatan name, not the Yehonatan name. The Yehonatan name is replaced with these Yonatans. I believe that they were replaced for the Yonatans because the style changed. I don't think there was any political message there, but the political message was obliterating the name of Janaeus as king and reinforcing his status as only the high priest. Now, there were also a lot of people that couldn't figure out how to date these overstrikes. Were they struck early in his reign or late in his reign? I got lucky and I was able to figure this out. Now, this is a regular overstruck coin. You can see traces of the overstriking, but it's a nice clear one. And you can read the inscription, Yan Tan, here's the Nun, Ha-Kohen, okay? Yan Tan Ha-Kohen. So we're gonna watch that coin, Yan Tan Ha-Kohen, it's right here. Now, I found this coin when I was going through one of about between 800,000 and 1 million of these kinds of small Jewish bronzes that I've looked at in my 55 years. And one time, about 20 years, I came upon this odd coin, which I looked at carefully and noticed that it was the anchor diadem coin, the normal type, overstruck upon a Yantan coin. Now, since 99% of the Yantan coins that we know about are overstruck on the rose and anchor coin, this established that the rose and anchor coin was struck and overstruck before Janaeus issued this massive series. And by the way, this is the way the obverse of the coin actually looked when I found it. These I did for contrast, and I filled in some letters so you could read them. But it's very clearly the Yan, not the Yeho. Yan, not Yeho. So that proves that this massive series was struck late in Janaeus's reign. Now, that's interesting and it makes sense. And by the way, these are some other examples of overstrikes that I also found that showed this type of coin, the anchor diadem coin, overstruck. Look on cornucopias. Look at this. You know, if you look at enough coins and if you have sharp eyes, there's no limit to what you can find. So as I said, this was one of Janaeus's later coins. And it evolved to not only his latest coins, but it also evolved into the coins that were struck by Janaeus's predecessors, or at least under his predecessors, if they weren't official issues, until the reign of Antigonus Mattathias. Now, a lot of people think, gee, they should have been making really nice coins during those years. Not so. Those were the years after Pompey the Great came into Jerusalem in 63 BC and went to the temple, and the Judean rulers after that, namely Hyrcanus II, Aristobulus II, were extremely weak and may not have even had the ability or the power to strike coins. So here are these Janaeus coins. They're pruta. This group is in the area of 2.5 grams. This is another similar type of pruta. And I say it's a similar type. Look, it's an anchor and a diadem. I mean, in fast change, these are all the same type. So to my mind, they must have essentially been the same denomination. This type is dated L, Kappa, Epsilon, the year 25. That's the year 25 of Janaeus's rule. And he started in 103 and ended in 76. So this was struck very near the end of his reign. And then as things got really bad after the Romans were in more control, the size and weight of the Jewish pruta went down to its lowest ever, averaging less than 1 gram apiece. And I proved all this in this study, in which I'm just going to focus you on the lines that have coins. But this was a study in which I personally weighed more than 10,000 prutot of similar types to figure out what their average and range of weights were. So in the case of this coin, I personally weighed 523 examples, my wife really thought I was nuts. And they ranged in weight from 1.71 to 0.3. Sorry, the average weight was 1.71, plus or minus 0.3, and the range was a little more than a half a gram to almost 4 grams. This is mathematical stuff on the standard deviation, which proves the validity of the numbers. This type, the dated type of Janaeus, I had 200 examples, and their average weight was 1.2, quite different and lower than the 1.71. But look at their range. The range of these coins was 0.61 to 1.71 grams. The entire range of these coins was well in the range, and in fact, in the average range of these larger coins. And finally, we get to the coins, some of which were likely struck when Janaeus was alive, but most of which were likely struck by his successors. And here I actually had 1,251 examples. The average weight was 0.81. You can see that the average is going down. The range is also going down, but look at the overlap in the range of these coins. It is my suggestion that the overlap of the range of these coins, not only between these two ranges, but between these two ranges and these two ranges, is absolute proof that these could not have been different denominations in the market. Sure, they may have thrown out small and ugly coins if they didn't like them, but these, in my opinion, were all small prutas. And as you know, especially this small type is generally referred to as the widow's mite. These are the twice dated coins of Janaeus. Again, I just want to review with you that it took many years. It was not until the 60s that one of the Israeli epigraphers translated this, and the Aramaic says, let me see where it starts. Malka Alexandros Shanat, here, Shanat Kofhe. Here it starts here. This is Aramaic. King Alexander, year 25. And here you have the dots that are usually connected by lines, sometimes not, that spell out year 25. And there is this one type, or this coin sometimes appears where it's clearly got the dated inscription here, but it doesn't have the dated inscription here. And as I say, these are already late and deteriorated, and it's really, I mean, maybe it was issued to commemorate the 25th anniversary of his reign, and it's that simple. And you would think that if he was doing that, he would have done it on the bigger, more glorious coins. But the very fact that he did this on these lower weight coins shows the seriousness and the officialness behind the coins and the denominations. Again, this is the dated coin, which I just showed you. And these are some of the, what seemed to me to be many, many hundreds of examples of these very crude, small crude tote that were issued I think not only at the main mint in Jerusalem, but kind of all over the place, maybe even as far away as Samaria. Janaeus, I would be neglectful if I didn't tell you about his lead coins and tokens. There is a lead coin or token, I suggest it's probably a token, that is very similar to the anchor diadem coin, to the anchor flower coin. It has the anchor in a circle and the name in Greek. This is a crude version of the same thing. Here's a drawing of the same thing. And then in Aramaic, which is pretty much modern Hebrew, it says here, Malka Alexandros, King Alexander. This, interestingly, I was lucky to one time come upon one of those that was unstruck, and you can recognize the nipple here that I was explaining to you how those were poured in molds. These are almost exclusively found in Jordan and sometimes in small hoards. I'm suggesting that they were tokens of some sort. I have no idea what they were. And then there is this other type of lead coin that honestly, we don't know if it should be attributed to the Hasmoneans or the Herodians. They're about the same size as prutas. And here they are decorated with things like splayed cornucopias, kind of a flower, kind of wheat branches in a splayed motif. We don't know what they are. As I say, these are coming from Mount Gerizim, and they're certainly being dated to the Hasmonean, late Hasmonean period as far as where they're being found. The next Hasmonean king that comes in, as I say, is sort of the last guy. And he came in on kind of a different situation than his other relatives, because he became the king and the high priest. Mattathias Antigonus became king and high priest the very same year that Herod went to Rome, supposedly to help adjudicate between some of Mattathias Antigonus's ancestors, and ended up, probably by his own design, being named king of the Jews in his own right. So this Mattathias Antigonus was king on the ground, but Herod was king in the eyes of Rome. So Mattathias Antigonus, who had some forces and some limited strength, and had allies in the Parthians, who were hated enemies of Rome, struck very showy coins for his age, for his time. This coin is the size and weight of 8 prutas. So it's, you know, it's like 10 or 12 grams. This one is half of that. So it seems clear that this is an 8 pruta piece, even though it doesn't show the denomination. This simply says the formula: Mattathias, the high priest, and the community of the Jews. Sometimes it's abbreviated. This says the same thing: King Antigonoi, King Antigonus. Same thing here: King Antigonoi and Mattathias HaKohen. The same thing with his single pruta coins. Here he uses the splayed cornucopias with an ear of wheat replacing the poppy or pomegranate. And here is his name, which interestingly is in retrograde, which means that in the die itself, it was carved correctly. So when it was stamped, it came out backwards. All of his prutas do not look like this, but the most common one does. And it's not clear whether there was something deliberate there. The most famous coins, however, and the coins that are the exceptions to my earlier rule about motifs being drawn from Hellenistic coins, are these very nationalistic coins. The only coins in ancient Judean series that depicts the menorah, the holy menorah that was in the Jewish temple. Now, as I discuss this with you, I want to point out a few things. It's, as I told you, Mattathias Antigonus was in a fight for his very survival as the ruler with Herod, who came in with his Roman allies and fought against Antigonus and his Parthian allies, and it took 3 years. And by the year 37, Herod was in charge, and Mattathias Antigonus was gone. But apparently, as a real nationalistic effort to try to gain popular support, he struck this series of coins, which is extremely rare, even though they come from a number of different dies. These are coins that we know to be genuine. Some of them are labeled, as you can see where they came from. Some of these came to my attention recently. And this one is an especially interesting one because on the top of this is the showbread table, and this is the 7-branched menorah. So the showbread table, and how do we know it's a showbread table? Because there is one die that shows these breads, which are, you know, if you think about it, this is what would happen if you stacked a bunch of pita on a table. They would curl up like this. And so this is probably examples of the showbread itself. It only appears on a couple of known examples. And by the way, this is probably the most commonly forged coin because it's so valuable if it's genuine. And again, I'm repeating some of those that I know to be genuine, and I am showing you coins that are also known to be forgeries in the market today. Now, this is an interesting one. This was sent to me by a numismatist at the Israel Department of Antiquities, telling me that it was seized in a village in the West Bank from a guy who had other genuine coins, but I was able to assure them that this is a fake coin that was in fact stamped on top of a genuine pruta. So the edges appear real, but the dies don't match, and it also shows signs of being not overstruck, but overpressed. If you overstruck an ancient coin, it would probably break it, but if you used a hydraulic press on a worn piece and did it slowly, you could make a forgery, and a lot of these are indeed made that way. Also, just to show you that the use of the menorah by Mattathias Antigonus was really the earliest use of the menorah by the Jews as a nationalistic symbol. I would encourage any of you who are interested in this subject to read the book by the new book by Jonathan Adler about the origins of Judaism. He makes a very convincing point using archaeology that the Judaism that we know today as Torah Judaism, where you keep kosher, you observe the Sabbath, etc., are very likely can trace their widespread origins to the beginning of the Hasmonean period, and that in fact, at the beginning, it was kind of a political movement to help the Hasmoneans gain power. I'm not going to make his argument, but I am going to tell you that it's fascinating and convincing. It isn't that the books stating these rules didn't exist earlier, but there is archaeological evidence that Adler cites that many of the things such as kashrut were not observed during the Iron Age and very much before the Hellenistic period. And as a sort of continuation of that, I wanted to show you how the menorah continued to be used, and really after it was first used by Janaeus on the coins, and it was used in some graffiti from about that time, but until the 3rd or the 4th century, it was barely used at all. And it came back into use as a nationalistic symbol of Judaism just about the same time that Christianity brought the cross into play. So these are all ancient objects. They're all now in the Israel Museum. I gave my collection to the Israel Museum. And here's a really interesting scroll. And at the bottom of the scroll, there's a crude 7-branch menorah carved. This is one from an oil lamp. These are from oil lamps. This is a ring stone. This is some kind of a seal, an amulet of some kind, and a jar handle. So you see how the symbols overlap, and you see how it took all of this time for all of the Hasmonean period, for the very last Hasmonean to finally use a symbol that was uniquely Jewish on his coin. So I just want to review. Hasmonean coins, the chronology has the Rosh coins coming first. The word Rosh in front of community of Jews was a pre-royal title. There were monograms on some of the Hyrcanus coins, but on the earliest ones with the fancy A's, they were probably a reference to the Seleucid king. But later, when they flip to the other side and become crude and differential, they are probably mint or minters' signatures on coins that were struck later. The flowers on the Hasmonean coins may be both a lily and a rose. The irregular coins, in some cases, may have been struck at official mints under strange circumstances, but it seems more likely, based on the metallurgy and the die matches, that they were casual market issues that were widely accepted. It's very likely that the successors to Janaeus struck the very small prutote that we call the widow's mites Only a very few of those may have been struck during his reign. And whoops, hey, that's not all, folks. Go back. Sorry. And seriation, which means the order of the kings, it is quite well agreed upon. When I entered this field in 1967 and a little bit before, there was a lot of controversy about which Hasmonean kings issued which coins. There is now general agreement among all numismatists who specialize in the field. The adaptation and innovation of only a very few local types, specifically the menorah and the showbread table. Otherwise, the Hasmonean coins drew their designs and their motifs from the Hellenistic rulers, and finally, the coins of the Hellenistic rulers. And finally, the words high priest evolves to the words king, just like the use of Hebrew and the word high priest sticks together, but the word king is used in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic on a few of the coins. And that is all. And I'm going to figure out how to unshare this and stop share. And now, Paula, you're in charge.
Perfect. I just want to say thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, you guys can put those into that Q&A button at the bottom or top of your screen. I did see somebody was asking if it was going to be recorded later, or if the recording was going to be put up on our website, and it is. Give us some time. Our people edit it and just make sure that it doesn't have anything extra that doesn't need to be in there. And then it'll be on our website under NumismaTalks. So if anybody has any questions.
Oh, I see that. I see there's one. Aaron Oppenheim is asking why the date of the 25th year. I think that it was like, what is that, the silver anniversary? I think that it was a big deal for him. So that would have been 104, 94, 84. It would have been 79, which was really only 3 years before he died. And, he was probably ill at that time. He was probably looking for things to celebrate. He had a lot of conflict between the political factions at the time. So that's my guess. That's my guess. No other clues, really.
Okay.
Could it be a reminder of the original victory of Maccabee on the 25th of Kislev? Personally, I don't think that they made those associations at that time. I don't think in general that the people of the time were as aware of the particular date or day of the week as we are today. So I find it hard to believe that would be the case.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to pop any more questions you have in there for David while I say thank you for joining us. And if you are looking for some more NumismaTalks, to go on our website, and they're under events, and you should be able to find them pretty easily. David?
Sure. Fred Spector, hi Fred. Fred is asking about the graven eagle coin. Well, the reason that I left that out is because that's a coin that was only struck under Herod the Great, and that is already that's already when the rulers and the coinage of the Jews moved from being under a Hellenistic umbrella to being under a Roman umbrella, and that's possibly part of the explanation, even though as I think that Fred means to point out, is that the lack of graven images also goes through the coins of Herod the Great and his son Herod Archelaus, but suddenly comes to an end with his son Herod Philip. Herod Antipas also doesn't use any graven images, but his son Herod Philip does use graven images, and his grandson Agrippa I and his great-grandson Agrippa II all take on Romanic coins. And just as the Maccabee, the Hasmonean coins reflect the Hellenistic tradition, these later coins begin to reflect the Roman traditions. Now, I see another
couple more
question.
popped up.
let me see if I can get them. Thank you, Aaron. Why the menorah coin? Well, the thing of the, I'm going to get to both of these. So the reason that the menorah design was not more commonly used, I believe, is that there actually was a prohibition at the time against reproducing objects from the temple. And it may have been a very daring and bold move by Mattathias Antigonus to do this. And that may be the reason it does not appear more, but then over time, you begin to see it in wall carvings, wall paintings as symbols of the Jews. And once the temple is destroyed, slowly, it begins to become an image. You know, I always wondered, I wrote this one time, I always wondered if the 7-branched palm trees in the Bar Kokhba coins, they're always 7-branched. Isn't that interesting? He never uses the menorah, but he always uses those 7-branch palm trees. Dan Pelk, you mentioned Salome Alexandra. Nice to hear from all of you, by the way. Salome Alexandra was the wife of Alexander Jannaeus. She did reign after he died, but as I mentioned, that time, he died in 76 BCE, and she took over just for a few years. Things were very troublesome, and it was during her period that Pompey came into Jerusalem, took Jerusalem, and entered the temple. He did make a sacrifice to the temple and stuff like that, but after the death of Jannaeus, it is certainly possible that she continued issuing coins. That's why I say successors, both Salome as well as her 2 sons. However, I will point out that Jannaeus issued an awful lot of coins during his life, and it's possible that there were plenty in circulation, including all those crude ones that I mentioned. So there's no evidence that Salome Alexandra struck coins. Certainly she doesn't have her name on any coins. And it seems to me that if you wanted to underline the fact that you were striking coins, you would put your name on them. There are some people that have suggested in the past that alpha on the top of the Hyrcanus coins might have referred to her, but if you look at the chronology, it's really too early. So it's much more likely that they referred to a Seleucid ruler, as I mentioned.
Looks like maybe Aaron has.
Oh, let's see. Hold on.
More.
I have to scroll down. Aaron it's surprising. As I say, I don't know how surprising it is because I don't know how the people at the time felt about the prohibitions. The prohibitions were gradually breaking down, but it's just not clear. I mean, if you think about the Bar Kokhba coins, he did not really violate any of the prohibitions, with the exception of showing an idealized version of the facade of the temple on his coins. The temple was already destroyed. So it's just not clear to us. You know, it's very hard to focus clearly on that kind of information. Aaron Oppenheim is also asking, with the enormous amount of bronze Prutot issued, why no silver coins at all? Silver coins were quite common and were manufactured in Tyre and by the Seleucid kings. They heavily circulated in the area of the ancient Holy Land. But if you look at the various tables of equivalence, in other words, how much money bought what kind of produce, you will see very quickly that the money of the marketplace in ancient Judea in the Hasmonean times and also the Herodian times was bronze. It is true that the Jews did not even try to issue silver coins, and they may have been forbidden to issue silver coins. But the truth of the matter is that the biggest thing that they cared about was the money of the market. and the money of the market was invariably bronze coins. The only exception to that would have been the payment of temple dues at the time, which was likely in either Tyre shekels or silver coins struck in Tyre that had to be tallied up by the money changer. I mean, you could also say, isn't it surprising that there weren't more specific Jewish symbols on the Jewish war coins, the pomegranates and the chalice? But for some reason, they weren't doing that. That was when the temple was there. They knew what was in the temple. So who knows?
Thank you, David, so much. Thank you. You are a wealth of knowledge every time. So I appreciate you doing this for us. And I hope everybody has a great day. And don't forget to check out NumismaTalks on the ANA website. Thank you so much.